Going back on the record, the time is 11:59 a.m.
Ms. Hofeller, you testified earlier today that Dale got all the good stuff. What did you mean by that?
The specifically work-related stuff, the stuff that would be, you know, the stuff that he wanted, the stuff that he felt was pertinent.
And you said he took 2 computers from your father's office, is that correct?
That's what I'm told.
You've also testified today that these hard drives and the thumb drives, you understood them to be backups, correct?
That's correct.
Was it your understanding that your father's work-related files that they had on the computer that Dale Oldham had taken, or computers that they'd taken, were also backed up on any of these hard drives or thumb drives that you received?
Objection calls for speculation.
Honestly, if I speculated, I would speculate that any backups that had been done specifically of the work computers would be already taken by him. I did not, actually the opposite. I assumed that these were personal backups because they were there with those things. And again, it's always been a little bit, those lines have always been a bit blurry in the household.
All right,
Do
I'm
you
going to remind everybody here that under North Carolina rules, counsel's only supposed to object to the form of the question. There are no speaking objections allowed in North Carolina. This is multiple times now that the witness has changed her answer in response to a speaking objection by Mr. Jones. Now, unless I'm mistaken, Mr. Jones, you do not represent the witness. Under the rules, you can object to the form of the question. That's it. You can instruct her not to answer, and she should not be changing her testimony in response to something that you articulate for her.
Ms. Hofeller, do you in fact know, one way or another, if the information that was contained on the hard drives and the thumb drives that you provided to Arlen Porter were in part duplicative of the information that was contained on the computers that Dale Oldham took possession of?
I really don't know. I really honestly don't know.
Turning back to your communications with Common Cause, you testified earlier that your first outreach to Common Cause was a communication that you had with someone named Bob Phillips, correct?
Correct.
When did that communication occur?
That would have been in very early November, the first week of November.
How many times did you speak with Mr. Phillips?
Once.
Was your communication with Mr. Phillips in person, telephonic? How did you communicate with him?
Telephonic.
What did you know about Common Cause when you reached out to Mr. Phillips?
I knew that they were representing the interest of voters that felt that this redistricting represented a violation of their constitutional rights.
And the redistricting that you're referring to, does that include the maps that were prepared by your father, Mr. Hofeller, in North Carolina?
Yes.
So you understood that Common Cause was seeking to have the redistricting maps that your father had prepared thrown out, correct?
Yes.
You knew that Common Cause was antagonistic to the work of your father, Mr. Hofeller, correct?
I didn't know that they were, initially I did not know that they were antagonistic to the new maps. When you say the new maps, what do you mean by that?
Well, he's drawn more than one set.
So interesting, no, I didn't actually know that there was a new case when I first spoke to Common Cause. I thought that this was all concerning maps that had already been redrawn.
You knew historically that Common Cause had been antagonistic to the work that your father had done in North Carolina, correct?
If that's the way to characterize it, then yes.
I believe you testified you reached out to Mr. Phillips to seek a referral for your mother. Did you communicate any specific details to Mr. Phillips about why you were looking for an attorney for your mother?
Yes, so that I could get the right kind of attorney.
Can you share with me specifically, to the best of your recollection, what you said to Mr. Phillips when you communicated with him on the phone?
That my mother was facing a challenge to her competence.
Did you share with Mr. Phillips who had brought the incompetency petition against her?
No.
Did you share with Mr. Phillips any information about who was involved in the incompetency proceedings?
Not specifically, no.
If I recall correctly, you testified that Mr. Phillips then put you in touch with Jane Pinsky.
That's correct.
Jane Pinsky also works for Common Cause?
Yes.
Is Ms. Pinsky a lawyer, if you know?
I don't think she is.
How many times did you speak with Ms. Pinsky?
In total, I believe that we had three or four conversations, all on the phone.
Do you know what Ms. Pinsky's title is with Common Cause?
Not offhand, no.
I want to go through the 3 or 4 communications that you had with Ms. Pinsky. Do you recall the first communication you had with her?
Yes.
The time period?
That would have been also very early November. Sometime during the first 8 or 9 days of November.
Was anyone else on the phone during that first communication that you had with Ms. Pinsky?
Not that I know of.
Approximately how long did that first communication with Ms. Pinsky last?
No, it wasn't a particularly long conversation. 10 minutes, maybe, if that.
Tell me what you recall about that conversation, what you said and what she said.
We confirmed that this was about the matter of referral, and that Bob had said that she would be the one that was more familiar with the names of local attorneys, and she had some names for me. And so I took down those names, and she wished me luck and expressed condolences for the loss of my father, and I think that was about it, that first conversation, I think.
When you first communicated with Ms. Pinsky, did she give you the impression that she was expecting your call? Did you make the call to her?
I think I don't actually know who initiated the call that was the one where we actually spoke. We exchanged a few messages. I got an email from Bob saying that he had told Jane to reach out to me, and then exactly what combination of who left who or what message, I'm not honestly sure.
You had an email communication with Bob. How many email communications did you have with Mr. Phillips?
One conversation that was, I think, maybe 2, maybe 3 messages. His saying that and me saying thank you. I think that was 2. I think it was all.
I just want to make sure I understand your testimony. You had one telephone conversation with Mr. Phillips, and then you had one email with Mr. Phillips, but the email may have had a couple of threads within it.
Recalling to my best ability, it was the email would have contained his noted that I would be hearing from Jane and my thanks
Reply.
for that.
Did you have any email communications with Jane Pinsky?
I think that I did, yes, because I wanted, we were confirming names and numbers and things, like I didn't know, how do you spell that? And I said, can you just email me that? And then I think it was more, I think maybe one more time an email. She really prefers to the phone. We both kind of felt that way, I think. So any further email was more to the like, are you going to be at the office? Can I reach you today? Are you busy? That sort of thing. Like the predicated a follow-up phone call about those attorneys. It was still pretty much exclusively on that, and just sort of incidentals on the topic of what this proceeding against my mother really actually was. You know, I didn't know much about what was actually being asserted. It's hard to explain. It wasn't really very detailed. It was just kind of clarifying what kind of attorney I would need, I think, really. Whether is this an estate attorney, is this a litigation attorney, is this... And a lot of my questions, she would then say, you know, I would have to ask an attorney what kind of attorney you need for your mother, that sort of thing.
Did you share with Ms. Pinsky any of the documents from the incompetency proceedings, any of the legal documents, court documents?
No, I don't think I did, actually. It didn't seem necessary or appropriate since she wasn't the attorney.
Approximately how many email communications did you have with Ms. Pinsky?
I think maybe a grand total of 2. If 2, I would have to look. It may even be just one thread. I didn't really study it.
Your first conversation that you had with Ms. Pinsky in early November, first 8 or 9 days, had lasted approximately 10 minutes. Can you tell me what you recall specifically about what was discussed during that conversation, what you said to her and what she said to you?
I don't recall specifics, no. I was just trying to get an attorney for my mother, so I don't remember exactly what I said.
In that first communication, did she give you names of attorneys that you could reach out to?
Yes.
In the first conversation that you had with Ms. Pinsky, did you talk substantively about who was involved in the incompetency proceedings?
No.
Did you at any point in time discuss with Ms. Pinsky who was involved in the incompetency proceedings?
Not that I recall, no. I really said very little other than I felt that the fact that my father had so many friends and co-workers and colleagues and supporters and really frankly people who really idolized him and had kind of a non-human vision of him. And that was why I was contacting Common Cause. I didn't have any, I wasn't expecting there to be a discussion about specific names. It seemed to me, from the point of view where I was at that time, that the specific names were going to have to be people in Raleigh that didn't worship my father. There was no need to detail. And also, I wasn't really trying to discuss the merits of my mother's matter with Common Cause. I was only trying to really seriously just hope that I might find an attorney in Raleigh that was independent of my father and the people he worked for.
When you say independent from your father, what do you mean by that?
I mean that in matters that concern a man as a person, often when you're dealing with people that only know him in a professional context and have a great deal of their personal and professional life mingled with that image, when you begin to speak about that person as if they were a human being with multitudes of emotions, contradictions, all of those things, often people get hostile. If you are bringing a human image to a hero's image, they sometimes feel that maybe they get angry.
How did your father's work in redistricting relate, if at all, to the incompetency proceedings that were ongoing with respect to your mother?
Many people who only knew my father incidentally or knew him only in one context were resisting the assertion that I had that perhaps my mother and I would know better what it was that my father wanted that was not specifically spelled out. There was a lot of speculation about what your father wanted, coming from a variety of sources, from people that really didn't know him very well outside of the context of work. And it was, frankly, a little bit offensive.
You did not have any conversations with your father regarding what he wanted to have happen with his work related to redistricting upon his death, did you?
I don't believe I ever had a conversation with my father about what he wanted to have happen after his death pertaining specifically to his work. I think he felt that once he was dead, that his work to him, at least, would be no longer relevant.
What led you to that belief?
He often would say that that was, you know, if you're going to divide people into camps of how they view death. My father would, whether he was sincere or not, he would often say, you know, sometimes jokingly, I don't know how well you knew him, but he had a penchant for irony. He would often say, well, it won't matter once I'm dead, right? So he also said things like, I know that people on their deathbed very rarely look up and say, I wish I'd spent more time at work.
At what point in time did you discuss with Ms. Pinsky that you had some of your father's hard drives that you thought might be of interest to Common Cause?
That would have been sometime in December. That was later. She called me to ask how things were going with my mother, because I also, one of the things that it was coming pretty clear to anyone who talked to me in that time, that there was a lot of emotion regarding the then still very recent death of my father, and that it was sad that, you know, the principal concern about him, his life, and everything having to do with him was this matter rather than the matter of his family.
How many conversations did you have with Ms. Pinsky about your father's hard drives and electronic materials that you had?
Pretty sure it was only one, because she said that she really would not be certain. I mean, really, that was it. I said, we had that conversation, she said, I'll ask the lawyers, and I think then any further conversation at all about that media was had with the attorneys.
When you say Ms. Pinsky said, I'll ask the lawyers, was that in response to a question you asked her? What do you mean by that?
That was not a response to a specific question. That was a response to the conversation that had begun with me mentioning the David Daley interview and saying, I have hard drives. And in the context of that article, David Daley had implied that those hard drives would have maps that the state legislators would like. I, once again, didn't really think that there was anything, I don't know how to describe it.
Do you have an understanding of which lawyer she was referring to when Ms. Pinsky said, I'll ask the lawyers?
The lawyers who were involved in this matter, since we were discussing whether or not there would be any use, any admissibility. Again, I thought I wasn't even sure that, I didn't even understand at that moment when I spoke to her the first time about it and mentioned that article. I was under the impression that everything in this matter was on appeal. So I wasn't thinking of it in terms of evidence for any case. I was thinking of it more just as an archival and academic interest.
When did you come to the understanding that this action in which you received the subpoena is still at the trial level and not on appeal?
Actually, what's funny is that I was a little bit confused, and again, other matters were really, really pressing throughout. So I wasn't spending a lot of time studying what was going on with this. I had somehow gotten the impression that this already was an appeal, but for some reason this was because it was going to the lower court that it wasn't. I just, I'm used to the lawyers saying things. Okay, all right, whatever. I didn't even know. I just thought it was a certain type of appeal that I wasn't even familiar with. I didn't actually understand completely that this was a new matter until it was said so, like about a week ago. I just, all I knew for certain was that unlike the congressional districts that are at the U.S. Supreme Court, this matter that new evidence would be allowed. That was what was clear.
How did you come to that understanding?
Because I believe it was that first conversation that on the matter, I think Jane mentioned that there might be. I think she might be. And again, she was always saying, I'm not, I would have to confirm that with the attorneys as a, good public servant.
What was Jane having to confirm with the attorneys?
That there would be, that the hard drives would be potentially usable as evidence in that the matter was open in that regard. I just, again, initially felt that Common Cause, being not directly affiliated with my father, would be a good, literally like a repository for the information that I felt had historical value beyond any partisan interest, but rather, I even used the words, insight into the process, the literal process, because again, I'm not an expert on redistricting, but I have worked in political demographics. And I have, alongside my father, he studied political philosophy in general. So the academic interest in this was paramount to me, even above any other potential. I'm not a North Carolina resident. I'm not a North Carolina voter. I have no personal concern about what happens in this case beyond the fact that this man was my father, and my mother was having a very unpleasant procedure in a town that was not our home, where the only people that she even knew were people that had been working with my father.
I believe you testified that Jane mentioned there might be some use for your father's materials as evidence, correct?
She did not put it in terms of use as evidence. She simply stated that the matter in the lower house was not a closed matter as far as evidence was concerned. I think that, I don't remember her exact words, but there was no implication in that there would be a literal use, just that there's even a possibility that new evidence could be heard on this matter at all.
So you did understand, based on your communications with Ms. Pinsky, that there was a possibility that this information might be useful in the matter, correct?
Yes.
I need to clarify one thing, I'm sorry. You said lower house. Did you mean lower court?
Lower court, yes, I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
Go ahead.
And the party you were producing the information that might be useful to was on the opposite side from the work your father had done, correct?
Objection asked and answered.
I understood that Common Cause was representing the voters.
Did Ms. Pinsky put you eventually in communication with any of the attorneys in this litigation?
Yes.
Did you initiate the communications with any of the attorneys in this litigation?
No.
Who did you first speak with as an attorney in this litigation?
I got a text from Eddie Spies.
Do you still have a copy of the text message you received from him?
I don't.
When did you receive the text from him, if you recall?
Shortly after that conversation with Jane, I believe that was December. Honestly, I didn't. The phone that I was using was running out of storage, so it was kind of, the phones will tend to dump those text messages. There was really no way for me to track it back to exactly when.
So you believe it was sometime in December 2018 you received a text message from Eddie Spies Jr. 2018, thank you. Correct?
Yes.
What do you recall the text message saying?
He introduced himself and basically said that, I don't remember exact words, more like Jane said you might be willing to speak to us, something along those lines, and basically asking permission for contact and doing what is now polite in business, and if you have a cell phone, you introduce yourself over text so that if he were to call again, I would know what that number was.
Did you respond to the text message?
Yes.
How did you respond?
Yes. I don't know if I said more than just yes, maybe something polite just to make it not so terse.
You responded via text, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Approximately how many text communications have you had with Mr. Spies?
Not very many. There was really more just an effort to schedule phone calls.
You have had more than one text communication with Mr. Spies, correct?
I think there were two, one in advance of two phone calls, two, are you going to be available at such and such a time sort of thing.
After you communicated in response to Mr. Spees' first text, where you said, yes, willing to talk to you, when was the next time you spoke with Mr. Spees?
I think that was about a week or so. It was, it was starting to get close to the holidays, so, there was time between communiques. If research needed to be done or references or questions asked, everything was starting to take a lot longer because it was the holiday season.
The next time you spoke with Mr. Spees, was that a telephone communication?
Yes.
Did you initiate the call?
I don't know. I really don't remember. It was, the idea being follow-up questions need to be asked on our end, and then the discussion continued as to whether or not there was, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it any differently than I've already explained it, frankly.
On the first telephone call that you had with Mr. Spees, was there anyone else on the call, as far as you know?
No.
So just you and Mr. Spees on the first telephone call?
That's how I remember it.
And that's all I can ask you for, is the best of your recollection today. Approximately how long did the first telephone call between you and Mr. Spees last?
Maybe 10 minutes again. There was not a lot of detail discussed. It was really more just a friendly business-style conversation.
Tell me, as to the best of your recollection, what you said and what Mr. Spees said on that first telephone call.
I said that I had material that might be relevant to the case.
Did you explain in any further detail what material you had?
Vague detail, external storage devices. I don't know whether or not I mentioned, I don't think I specifically said backups. I just said external storage devices.
What do you recall Mr. Spees saying in response to that?
I believe that he did, even in that first phone call, want to clarify that these were, that these had been given to me.
What specifically did Mr. Spees ask you about the hard drives?
I think if they had been given to me.
And so your recollection is Mr. Spees said, have these been given to you?
I don't know what his exact words were. The gist of it was, are they yours? And I said that they had indeed been given to me.
Did you tell him the circumstances under which you had obtained them?
More or less. That along with things that literally belonged to me and things that I took to mean from my father that he wanted me to have, I had asked for these. And as I said, I asked my mother if I could take my jewelry box too, even though, of course, the answer would have been yes. And in many would say that if it was something that I left with my father, of mine specifically, with the intent that he would hold it for me, that when I came to his apartment after his death, that anything that had belonged to me up till the point of his death was already mine. But I still went to the extra effort to make sure because, I didn't want to give anyone the impression that I was there to pick over the corpse.
Just to clarify, your father never told you he wanted you to have his external hard drives or these thumb drives, correct?
He said that he would keep the data that I had stored on his computer. With that, I took to mean we didn't really get a chance to discuss the details of all of his personal effects, because when I last spoke to him, he wasn't dying.
The information you turned over to Arnold and Porter in response to the subpoena was not limited to your personal data that you discussed with your father that he would preserve for you, correct?
Correct.
You did not have any conversations with your father in which he told you he wanted you to have possession of his hard drives or thumb drives, which you turned over to Arnold Porter, correct?